Good morning, everyone. I'd like to preach today about a verse that I read during my devotions in December. I was going through a devotional about finding breathing space, and I'm sure you'd like to know the details of that devotional. I have got them. But I started reading this devotional, and this verse was part of one of the day's devotions. And since then, I haven't been able to get it out of my mind and my heart, and I really feel like God's spoken to me through this verse. And so this is it, Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3. So I sent messages to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? That was a reply that Nehemiah gave to messengers who'd been asking him to come down to stop doing what he was doing. I've read the book of Nehemiah, but that verse intrigued me and got me wondering, what was it about this great project that Nehemiah was doing that he didn't want to stop, that he didn't want to come down and talk to these people? How bad were these people? And so, surprisingly or not so surprisingly, the story starts in Nehemiah chapter 1. So I'd like to read to give us a little bit of context to that verse about this great project that Nehemiah was talking about. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hananiah, one of my brothers came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnants that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. Jerusalem had pretty much been destroyed, so he wants to know what's happening back there. He's in exile. What's going on? What's happening with God's people? They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province and are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept." At that time, Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king, and he plucks up all his courage and he asks the king if he can go back to Jerusalem. And he rebuilds the wall of Jerusalem, and he gathers the people, and for the sake of his people, he goes back and he gathers everyone together and he rebuilds Jerusalem, the wall of Jerusalem. And it's while he's busy rebuilding this wall that these guys come wanting to talk to him. And it takes us back to Nehemiah chapter 6, where it says, "When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it." And then he adds in, "Though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates," just for our information. "Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messages to them with this reply, and here it is: I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same reply. 4 times. I don't know about you, but when I'm involved in a project, it doesn't often take 4 times, especially when it's building, not that I build, something hard like that. It doesn't take 4 times to distract me from that project or to stop me from doing it. Nehemiah seemed to have such a conviction about what he was doing. He seemed to be so determined and so passionate about this great project that it kept him there even though they were calling him down. It kept him resolute in his answers and his replies to them. I was once given a great project by my mom and dad when I was 14 years old. I was a very colicky, difficult baby, and so it took my mom and dad quite a while before they decided to have any more children. And there's quite a big age gap between me and my 2 younger brothers, which meant most of the time my mom and dad had untapped babysitting available to them. And on this one particular Saturday evening, they left me in charge of my two little brothers. My mom had already cooked supper. She had put her supper in the oven. She explained to me when it would be ready. I needed to just take it out and feed them. And it was all going along very swimmingly until my friend phoned to say, "Don't you want to come out with us? My family are all going to meet up with, those guys and that group, and we are going to have such fun." And I remember looking at my little brothers and thinking, I'm sure they'll be fine. Yes, this is confessions. So I explained to my baby brother how to turn the oven off and how to get his dinner out, and off I went. Thankfully, our house didn't burn down, and my little brothers weren't physically harmed, although my one brother did not want to stay home from school or anywhere alone for a very long time, I think till he was about 21. And I was properly disciplined because my parents, who are very gracious, were obviously unimpressed with their 14-year-old daughter who'd been so irresponsible. I was not at all as committed as Nehemiah to my great project. I got distracted very easily and disappeared, and actually there were other lives at stake. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the story of Nehemiah, is that he didn't go back to Jerusalem to build a wall because I don't think he enjoyed building. I don't think he went back because he was hating being a cupbearer to the king. He went back for the sake of his people, and he went back because he was moved with conviction. And I got thinking along the lines of this idea of a great project, because I don't know about you, but I don't always view what I'm doing as a great project. I don't generally have that perspective. We just kind of seem to go through the motions of every day. Here's my current running definition, based on this one devotion that I had, of a great project. I believe that a great project is something small or big that God has given me to do, created me to do, or is nudging me to do. A great project will always impact the lives of others, even if it's just because they are inspired by my courage to do what God is telling me to do. Can I read that again? I know it's not profound because it's my definition. You might have a way better one based on the story of Nehemiah, but I think it's worth thinking about this idea of a great project and what are the things that God's created us and nudging us to do. A great project is something small or big that God has given me or you to do, created us to do, or is nudging us to do. A great project will always impact the lives of others, even if it's just because they are inspired by our courage to do what God is telling us to do. I believe that God has great projects for every single one of us. Great projects like Nehemiah was busy doing. It's not so much about what it is we're doing, but it's the perspective we have and the fact that we followed God's nudging to do that great project. Sometimes I think we stumble onto great projects without realizing just how great and important they are. An example of that is being a mom. We can very easily become a mom sometimes, and sometimes not so easily, but often when we're moms, we don't realize just how important and how great that job is of being a mother. We can wish away the days of busyness and the sleepless nights. We can hope that the mess and the constant demands, that season goes quickly without realizing what an incredible gift our children are and what a great project God has given us in raising them. Great projects will look different for every single one of us. Sometimes we might be able to do them short term, and every year there might be a different project, or sometimes it's a 1-week project. Sometimes a project can last a lifetime. It's something that God's put on your heart to do, that He has for you to do, only you. And as we do them, we find fulfillment in living the adventure that He's created us to live. So, what are the great projects that God has got for you this week or this year or perhaps in your lifetime? What are the things that He's created you to do? What is He nudging you in the direction of this year? Or perhaps maybe you're already involved in a great project. You know you're doing what God's created you to do, but along the way, perhaps there's been a Sanballat in your life who's trying to pull you off the wall, or something that's caused you pain while you're doing what God's called you to do. Today, I really believe that God wants to give us fresh courage and fresh vision for those great projects that He has for each one of us. So what can we learn from Nehemiah? Not from me as a 14-year-old girl. What can we learn from Nehemiah as we look at the story? What are the things that we can take from it and that will help us to do what God's called us to do, the great projects? Firstly, I believe that we need to know what our great project is. We need to know what our great project is. Sometimes I think we get so busy doing whatever shouts the loudest or whatever seems most urgent that we don't stop and pause and ask God to show us what it is we should be giving our best energies and efforts to. Mark chapter 8, verse 34 to 37, and I'm going to read it in the Message translation because I really just love the way that it puts this verse. Jesus speaking, it says, calling the crowd to join His disciples, Jesus said, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. Are we asking God to lead us? Are we giving Him opportunities to lead us into what we're doing? Or are we just going through the humdrum of whatever needs to be done next? How do we let Him lead us? I really believe that we need to pause. We need to stop, take stock, and ask God, and then to take time to listen and to wait on Him for what we should be doing. Otherwise, we'll just keep doing whatever we've already been doing and hoping and praying that God will bless it. We were at the beach on holiday in December, and on the first morning that we had stayed over and we were now going down to the beach, we packed the car and off we went. And I have 2 sons and a husband who's willing to do all kinds of sport with them because they love it. So as we arrive at the beach, generally they get out the ball, Steve hits them catches, and that keeps them busy until they get too hot and then we swim. That's pretty much, I know we're quite routine, but that's pretty much how our mornings at the beach go. Which means as a mom of boys, I get to sit and relax. So on this morning, it was as usual. The boys went off to do catches, and I sat there and I suddenly felt like I should be doing something. And so I looked in Steve's bag because he brings the valuable stuff, and I looked for my cell phone, and I had left my cell phone at the beach cottage, which I had done on purpose, but it wasn't there, and I thought I would maybe check Instagram or something. And then I looked in the snack box, and I thought I can't start eating the snacks without them, and so early on in the beach day. And then I had forgotten to bring a magazine. I always take a magazine to the beach, and I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. I realized I've forgotten what it's like to sit still. I've been so busy doing and planning and organizing and just life, and life is busy, but I've been so busy doing life that I've forgotten what it's like to just sit in solitude. I think solitude might be one of the lost arts of our current culture. In Mark chapter 1, verse 35, it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Everyone was looking for Jesus when he finished praying, but he knew after praying he needed to go on to another village. I believe that it's times of solitude, times of sitting alone, talking to Jesus, that we find again and realign our priorities, that we can hear the whispers of heaven, that we can work out exactly what great works, what great projects we're supposed to be giving our time and energy to. I think we need to find a place where we're not going to be distracted, where there are no cell phones. I discovered that amazing app on my cell phone where it's got the Bible and you can read, and you don't lose your place. It just takes you exactly to where you are, and it's a really great app. I've been recommending it to friends. The only problem with reading my Bible on that app is that every time a message comes through, ooh, and then I think, gosh, I need to reply to that message, try to go back to the Bible. It can be a huge distraction having a cell phone. It can be a huge distraction having noise all around us. We need to find places of quiet. We need to find places of solitude where we can hear the whispers of heaven, where we can hear Jesus' voice. My dad, when he was at work, he worked long hours, and we had 4 children in our family. So when he came home, it wasn't going to be quiet. And he used to often tell me that at lunchtimes he would close his office door and his staff knew not to disturb him. Lunchtime was his time of solitude. It was his time of praying and reading the Bible. If we want God to lead us, if we want to give him opportunities to lead us into doing the great projects that he has for us, we have to give him time to talk to us. We have to give him time to be able to whisper the whispers of heaven to us. I've started using a notebook for, as I start reading the Bible, if I think of those things that I should be doing or should have done or need to do, I write them down so that I stop thinking about them and I can actually concentrate on what I'm doing and on praying. And that's really helped me. It might help some of you if that's something that you're prone to do, or if you're a real task-orientated person like myself. I also think it's important that whatever we feel during those times, or whatever we think God might be saying, we might think it doesn't sound quite right, or it might be silly to others, but to write those things down. I've often found that it's in those times I think, I wonder, and then something else happens, there's a circumstance or something that comes up, and I think, gee, that's actually confirmation of what I had felt. I'd kind of been going out on a limb, maybe God was saying that, and then someone else confirms it for me. I think it's important to write down what we feel God whispering to us in those times of solitude. Most of the greatest artistic works and inspired inventions have come in the midst of solitude. Solitude works as a catalyst, providing the necessary time, space, intensity of focus, and energy that is required to bring anything to life. We sometimes get so busy that we're almost awkward and uncomfortable with solitude. I believe we need to find moments of solitude again so that we can enjoy the adventures of great projects that God has planned for us, and we don't just keep doing the things we've always done. Secondly, looking at the story of Nehemiah, we can't afford to get distracted. We can't afford to get distracted. I had a near-death experience once. Actually, I've had 2 near-death experiences that I can remember in this moment. And both of them was when I was trying to cross the road. The second time, the one that I'm referring to, is a time when someone in our church tried to run me over. They actually didn't try to run me over, they almost ran me over, and she felt so dreadful, and it was completely my fault because while crossing a 3-lane road, I got distracted. And it was in our old church, just in case you're wondering who that sweet person is. But I thought I'd got away without it becoming a public, everyone aware of how distracted I get crossing the road, until this poor woman had felt so dreadful that she decided to phone the church office. Now, in our family, it's become a bit of a joke because I get distracted so easily, and the last person I'd like to know that I almost got myself run over was actually my husband. And again, it might have been okay because this lady thought that she had run she stopped right here, and the only way I knew she was there was the screeching brakes. So it was a near-death experience. Anyway, she phoned the church office because she thought she had run my sister-in-law over because both Steve and his brother worked at the same church office, and she had seen both of us around church, and she wasn't exactly sure which one she had almost run over. So she phoned the church office to apologize to whoever it was. And the receptionist, I'm not sure why she decided it must have been me, but she put her on to chat to Steve. So my point is, we can get easily distracted. And there's lots at stake. Not just our lives, but the lives of others. Nehemiah was there building that wall because of the people of Jerusalem. And the great projects that God has for us will always impact the lives of others. We can't afford to get distracted along the way. We need to say no to some things that perhaps we've said yes to before, but because of the great projects that God's given us, we need to say no so that we can say yes to Him. 4 times these guys tried to get Nehemiah to stop doing his great project. 4 times. I've got this picture of Nehemiah up the ladder, busy building this wall, and he says, I'm not coming down. And they're like, please come down. I'm not coming down. Please come down. I'm not coming down. It's like this resolute determination. You're not getting me off this wall. And that's what I believe we need as we head out into 2018, as we do what God's called us to do, the little and the big things, this resolute determination to say, God, I'm following you, and I'm going to close the door on those things that will stop me from pursuing you, that will stop me from doing what I know you've been telling me to do. While I was preparing, I saw this picture of someone slamming closed a door, locking it, and throwing away the key. And I believe that there's some people sitting here today, and you know God's been nudging you. You know God's been saying something. It's been on your heart for a while, and there just seem to be things that get in the way every time. Things that stop you from living out the adventure that God has for you. And I believe it's going to take drastic action. Drastic action. And the 2 words I felt was vulnerability, and now I can't remember the other one. Vulnerability and honesty. To speak to someone, to get help, to do whatever it takes. Why? Because it's a great project that God's got for you. It's a great project, and you can't afford to allow those things to stop you and to distract you any longer. Firstly, we need to know what great work God has for us. Secondly, we need to get rid of the distractions, the things that will stop us. Often it's not just the bad things that stop us, it's all the good things that just clutter our lives, that stop us from doing the great things. And thirdly, we need to be willing to count the cost. We need to be willing to count the cost. Nehemiah paid a high price for rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. He paid a high price. He firstly was very courageous when he went to the king and said, can I go and rebuild the wall? That was a dangerous thing to do. Secondly, he went to Jerusalem. He worked hard. He put in hours and hours into rebuilding that wall. There was a cost involved. And there will always be a cost involved when we embark on a great project that God has for us. Are we willing to make the sacrifices? Are we willing to be ridiculed? To have people look at us or say things that perhaps misunderstand our good intentions of wanting to follow God? That cost is worth paying if we understand what a great project it is that God has given us to do. We will never, ever fulfill the great projects God has for us if we are not willing to do something hard and difficult, if we're not willing to be uncomfortable, if we're not willing to take risks. That verse that I read earlier about Jesus asking us to let him lead, it carries on. It says in Mark chapter 8, verse 34 to 37, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat, I am. And then he says, don't run from suffering, embrace it. Follow me, and I will show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way. my way to saving yourself, your true self? What good would it do to get everything you want and lose you, the real you? What could you ever trade your soul for? There is a cost involved, but there's a great reward. Following Jesus is so worth it, and the adventures and the great projects he has for every single one of us. If we can catch a glimpse of that, the cost becomes bearable. I run with Natasha Foster, and for those who don't know Natasha Foster, she is the lady who went off on a mission to Malawi and came back and felt God nudging her to do a great project of taking Bibles into Africa. And when I hear her talking about this great project that she's involved in, I have to remind myself that great project insecurity is not something from God, because the great project I'm involved in and the great project you're involved in and the great project Natasha's involved in are totally different projects. Sometimes I think we think that's a great project, so mine can't be that great, so I just won't do my project. Does that make sense? If I lost you along the way, that's the kind of communication Steve gets every day. A long sentence. So I run with Natasha Foster, and we've been chatting about her great projects. And it all sounds incredibly phenomenal. These thousands of Bibles that her and a whole group of people have now gathered on board and are sending up into Africa. But I know that there's a cost involved. I see her juggling, trying to fit in the school assemblies that she's going to tell her story. She doesn't even love to tell her story in public, and yet she's being put up there on a stage regularly to tell her story about what God's put on her heart, this great project that so burns within her. I went to an event the other night where they were talking about the Bibles Beyond Borders idea and fundraising and everything. And as I drove in, who was on the sidewalk parking the cars? It was Natasha's husband, Chester. And he said, "Look at me, here I am." Parking cars. He was paying a price because they feel like this is something that God's given them to do. There's a cost involved. For Steve and I, and what we feel called to, it actually involves a lot of evenings out sometimes. And that for me has been a cost that I've had to weigh up, because I don't love late evenings. I am a real early bird. I don't like organizing babysitters. I don't like juggling to make it work, but I know that there's a great project that God has given us. And there's a cost that's involved that each one of us need to pay if we want to follow that great project, if we want to do it. And we are living our dream. God has given us a real adventure, but there is a price to pay. I came across a story about the great cathedrals in Europe. And this one on the screen, if you wouldn't mind popping it up, Lisa, thank you. That is the York Minster. Friends of ours went to plant a church in York. They took their 2 girls. They left a whole lot of relatives and family behind in South Africa. They paid a serious price. So when I think of this cost involved in following what God has for us, I often think of them. But this is the York Minster, and there's a book about cathedrals that I heard someone speak about once, and they said that as you read the book, very often you look at these grand, beautiful, incredible buildings, but so often it says builder unknown. Builder unknown. And the reason the builder's unknown is generally these buildings take so many hundreds of years to build that actually it's longer than any one person's lifetime of building. And to be involved in that incredible project, I think, wow, that's amazing. But to build something for all of your working years and never be able to see its completion, that's quite an incredible feat. And they said in that book that no great cathedrals will ever be built again because no one is willing to put in that amount of hard work. It's quite an amazing thing. Do we, in our lives, are we willing to be builder unknown? Are we willing to put in the hard work and the effort because we really believe that what we're doing is what God has given us to do, without the recognition, without worrying about what it looks like in the end, but trusting God that He will work it out, and that He will build a great building with our lives and with the generations to come. Those guys who built those beautiful cathedrals must have built wondering about their grandchildren, wondering about their great-grandchildren, and who would live and who would come and meet with God in those beautiful buildings. That particular York Minster took 250 years to build. Jesus himself is busy with a great project. And all the little projects that we get to be part of are part of his great project. I believe part of the reason that Jesus was so focused on what he wanted to do, the part of the reason he took time out in solitude, was because he knew that he was busy with a great project. And he paid the ultimate price by coming to earth to die for us. He sacrificed so that we could have life, so that we could have relationship with him. What an incredibly great project that he's involved in, changing the lives of people. We hear it often at intro teas when people want to join the church, how they've met Jesus and how it's changed their lives, how they've come into community and how that's changed the way that they live out their lives. It's the most incredible privilege that we get to be part of God's great project. And every single one of us are a piece of that, are a part of that. Nehemiah built the wall, but there were so many others involved in building that wall. It took the whole community. And as every single one of us gets rid of the distractions, finds out what it is, what piece of the wall we're meant to be building, what our great project is, and we do it, no matter the cost, no matter how hard it is, we process the pain that might come our way because we've decided to do that thing. I believe that God wants to build beautiful buildings through and in our lives that will impact people. He's not into buildings. He wants to build beautiful, how do I say it? Those cathedrals, the reason they were built was so that people would meet with God. And all that we do, I believe God wants to use it to impact the lives of others. So as you head out into 2018, may you be like Nehemiah, resolute, convinced, and not willing to stop doing what God's called you to do.